Hi, my name is Althea Barnett. The pioneer that was assigned to me is Edwin Ray Guthrie. Guthrie was an American psychologist, philosopher, and mathematician, and he is most famous for his theory of contiguity. Edwin Guthrie's theory of contiguity states that a combination of stimuli which has accompanied a movement will, on its reoccurrence, tend to be followed by that movement. And Guthrie actually said this when he published his work on his own theory in 1952. Okay. The early life of Edwin Ray Guthrie. Edwin Guthrie was born on January 9, 1886, in his hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska. His parents were Harriet Pickett Guthrie and Edwin Guthrie. His mom was the daughter of a newspaper salesman, and his father, Edwin, was the son of a minister and preacher. Harriet was an elementary school teacher, and his father, Edwin, was a piano store manager. Edwin Guthrie came from a family of modest means. One was a school teacher, like I said, and the other one was a store manager. Edwin was the oldest of 5 children. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And it's interesting to note that Guthrie began showing academic promise at a very young age. In the 8th grade, he read some of Charles Darwin's works. And then just an interesting fact is that for Guthrie's high school thesis, he wrote on how words do not convey absolute truth because their meanings are dependent on what humans define them as. And he did this by using the Bible as an example. He said words can't stand for themselves. They're not absolute truth because humans, we have defined what each word means. And then another fact is that just during high school, he worked as a clerk for the railroad. Edwin Ray Guthrie's personal and professional life. After graduating high school, Guthrie began his attendance at the University of Nebraska. Here, he majored in mathematics with a minor in philosophy. And he took 1 or 2 courses in psychology at this time, but he didn't take a whole lot, and mainly it was just because psychology was still part of the philosophy department at this time. He got his bachelor's degree in 1907, and then he stayed at the University of Nebraska to get his master's degree, which he got in 1910. Soon after getting his master's, Guthrie became a Harrison Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. He pursued his doctorate degree at Pennsylvania, and his doctorate degree was in symbolic logic. It's interesting to note that while he was getting his master's degree and his doctorate degree, Guthrie taught high school in Nebraska and Pennsylvania. So he taught 3 years of high school mathematics in Nebraska and then 2 years of high school mathematics in Pennsylvania. Guthrie became an employee of the University of Washington in 1914 as a philosophy instructor, and then he stayed here until his retirement. There were a few times when he would take leaves. One instance was during the war. He served as a lieutenant, and then during World War II, he would serve again, this time in the Office of War, I believe. He married Helen McDonald in 1920, and they had a son together. I was unable to find out his son's name. There was one source that said his name was Peter Guthrie, but it's not a very reliable source. It was Yahoo Answers, so I'm not real positive on what Edwin and Helen's son's name was. Edwin and Helen, they traveled together. They actually went to France where they would meet Pierre Genet, and the reason I mention that is because Edwin and Helen would actually translate Pierre Genet's principles of psychotherapy together. Guthrie had accomplished most of his work at the University of Washington, and just to mention how he had been promoted over the years. In 1918, he was promoted from instructor to assistant professor, and then in 1919, he actually joined the psychology department. He continued to get promoted in 1925 when he became associate professor, and then again in 1928 when he became full professor. In his later years, he was the dean of graduate school, and his dean status lasted from 1914 to 1952. And this is just a picture of the University of Nebraska. This is where he would get his bachelor's and his master's degree early on in life. Guthrie accomplished a lot. I listed a lot of things that he's not known for, but a lot of things that he did on the previous slide. But out of all his accomplishments, he's best known for and famous for his theory of contiguity. And then contiguity simply just means the state of closeness or proximity. And just to reiterate exactly what the theory is stating, it's stating that a combination of stimuli which has accompanied a movement will on its reoccurrence be followed by that movement, or tend to be followed by that movement. So in other words, when you do something in one situation, in just one given situation, the next time you're in that same situation or one that's slightly similar to it, you will tend to do the same thing or give the same response. So according to this theory, all learning is an association between stimulus and response. Movements are small stimulus-response combinations. Learned behavior is a series of movements, and then it takes time to develop the movements into an act. This theory also establishes that what is learned is movements, not behaviors. So what Edwin is saying here is that whenever you're learning to do something, you're not learning a behavior. You're not learning how you'll you're learning a series of movements. As far as one example could be whenever you're typing on a computer, your brain is learning the muscular movements it takes to type your name into the computer. That's really all the theory is saying. It's very, Guthrie's actually very well known for the simplicity of his theory. There's so many sources that say just how simple it was, and that's the reason why many other psychologists would not really pay much attention to his theory because of how simple it was. Okay, Guthrie would do an experiment with George P. Horton to see how accurate his theory was. So what they did is they started out with they set up a glass paneled box, which is called a puzzle box, and the puzzle boxes were invented by Edward Thorndike. But anyway, they set up a glass panel box so that they could see all of the cat's movements. And it was built so that the cat could open the door by touching a post. And Edwin and George were looking to see if, after the cat had figured out the first time how to get out of the box, if it would do it again just faster. So in their experiment, it took the cat approximately 15 minutes to first touch the post. But then the second time the cat was put in the box, it had a tendency to duplicate the first behavior. So this is just an image of it. At the very top left-hand corner, it's just whenever the cat was originally put in the box, it circled around, and then by the one that says K5 right below the very first image, I believe that's whenever the cat would have originally started getting out of the box, and then they would start it over again just to see if the cat would continue to do the same actions in order to get out of the box. And it showed that the cat would indeed have a tendency to duplicate its first behavior so that they could get out of the box. Okay, what is there to learn from this theory? Animals learn an association between stimulus and a behavioral act after only one experience. And this is very important because this was the part of the basis of Guthrie's theory. He was saying that it only took one association between stimulus and response in order for you to learn the movement or the behavior. Whereas there were others, such as Ivan Pavlov, that had his theory of classical conditioning, which said that you had to have a repetition in order to learn. But here, Edwin's not saying that. He's saying that it just takes one experience only. As long as there's a connection between the stimulus and the response, then you will have a learned behavior the very first time. And then he's just saying that numerous trials are not duplication, but learning to respond to similar complexes. So here it's just saying whenever you do it over and over again, you're not doing it in repetition. You're doing it over and then learning to respond to things that are similar to that same situation. It's not the exact same situation. And I kind of relate this to a math problem. In high school, they give you a certain set of math problems and they work them with you, and then you have to go through on your own and figure them out. And I always seem to run into a problem that was just similar, but it had an extra step or didn't need a certain step in order to finish the problem. And that's how I kind of relate it to what it was saying. So therefore, only after we form several associations can behavior be learned. So you have to have several ones over just one. Okay. And then the people that influenced Guthrie, there were many, but I shortened it down to just two. One of them was Edwin Thorndike. I mentioned him earlier, and the reason why I say he influenced Guthrie is because it was his puzzle boxes that Guthrie would actually use in his experiment, and I think that's just very important, because if it wasn't for Edward having created and constructed those boxes, then Guthrie may not have been able to figure out a way to do his experiment. And this is just a picture of the boxes. It's a little contraption, and it can be constructed almost any way to either allow the animal to have a treat or to let the animal out of the box in order to have them learn a conditioned response. The next one was Ivan Pavlov. and it was his theory of classical conditioning that Edwin would kind of branch off of. Ivan was a Russian scientist, and then classical conditioning is just conditioning in which the conditioned stimulus is paired with and precedes the unconditioned stimulus with a conditioned stimulus and precedes the unconditioned stimulus until the conditioned stimulus alone is sufficient to elicit a response. So, like I said, Guthrie's theory of contiguity is just an extension of Pavlov's classical conditioning. However, Guthrie states that reinforcement, positive or negative, and punishment and repetition are not needed for the association to be learned. Like I said, Guthrie just stated that as long as there is a connection between stimulus and response, then you only have to do it one time in order to learn it. Guthrie's late life consisted of serving in the Office of War Information from 1942 to 1943. He accepted a Dean of Graduation School positions in 1943, and that lasted till 1951. He became the American Psychological Association's president in 1954, and then he finally retired in 1956. After his retirement, he was awarded a gold medal from the American Psychological Association for his contributions to psychology. And then Guthrie would die of a heart attack April 23rd, 1959. So the educational importance. Guthrie stated that we learn only what we ourselves do, and I think this really goes towards like his importance towards teachers, because it's important for teachers just to take a step back and let students do things on their own, to learn their way. Because if teachers just did everything for the students, then they would never learn anything for themselves. They would always be dependent on the teacher. And this is my bibliography. And this is my bibliography continued. Thank you for watching.